I'm Krys Blackwood. I'm a principal user experience designer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm both a designer and a researcher, and I've been in the business for 26 years now. When I first started, the word usability had to be explained to people. And e-commerce was a new and scary thing for people. I remember pitching why a company needed an e-commerce website. And I said, because 70 million people are on the internet. So that's how long I've been around. And this is my passion. And NASA JPL is the best job I've ever had.
Amazing. I love that you say that back then there were people that needed to be told what e-commerce and explain what usability is, as if that just hasn't completely changed. I think we're still having to have those conversations, unfortunately, but hopefully there's a few more. So yeah, I think let's start kind of chronologically and go from there. I'd love just to hear a bit around your background. How did you end up joining NASA? Was it a plan, happy accident? What were you doing beforehand?
Yeah, so I have a kind of an interesting background in that I sort of accidented into being a human-centered designer. I started out as a developer and found that I loved design much more. It was just my passion was how things worked, not making them work. And started studying psychology and design on my own. So I didn't go to school. There were no undergraduate programs for design back then anyways. And I think there was maybe one graduate program. And so kind of worked my way up from agency through startups in Silicon Valley. But I always had this sort of eye on being at NASA. And, you know, when I was younger, I thought that meant I had to be an astronaut, and I was totally into that, but they were not into me being an astronaut for great reasons. And so when I discovered that a friend of mine we were working together at a company in Silicon Valley, and he had come from NASA. So I was like, wait a minute, NASA hires UX people? What? And I immediately started applying, and I applied for 10 years at NASA Ames, which is a different NASA center. And then my friend went to NASA JPL. And when they had an opening, he said, you know, Krys, I know you've been wanting to be at NASA. You should apply, nudge, nudge. And sure enough, I applied. And 3 months later, gosh, it was grueling. They gave me the job, and it was probably one of the happiest days of my life. Maybe when my daughter was born was a slightly happier day, but only slightly.
Birth of two brilliant things. Yeah, awesome. I mean, I know you just, I mean, 10 years, that's crazy. And you just mentioned one of the other kind of units that different JPL versus some of the other centers that you applied for previously, and we spoke about it before when we caught up, but maybe just kind of background context for other people, like the different, I know, I think you said there were kind of 9 other NASA centers, might have got that wrong, but maybe kind of just we could just touch on kind of what JPL is, what it kind of specialize in, maybe why it's a bit kind of unique compared to some of the other centers that they have.
Yeah, your memory is exceptional. There are 10 total NASA centers. They're spread throughout the United States. There are 2 in California. That's because California is really big, so it can fit 2. And each NASA center has sort of its specialty. JPL is different than the other NASA centers for a few reasons. The first is that we are actually older than NASA itself. JPL is 86 years old, and we are why you have space flight. Explorer 1, the very first spacefaring satellite, was created by JPL's founders here at JPL. So the rocket fuel that we use was created here. It was all done at JPL. So the other reason, JPL is privately owned. It's owned by Caltech, which is California Institute of Technology, and not by the US government. All the other NASA centers are owned by the US government. But the fact that we are what's called an RDC, federally funded research and development center, not that that's important, access, and there are certain projects that you can't work on. But other than that, yes, you can be a foreign national and totally work for JPL. And in fact, some of my favorite colleagues are not US citizens.
Amazing. That's good to know. So I would imagine off the back of this now, lots of people are going to start Googling, seeing what openings there are and seeing how they can get involved and get their applications in. Cool. So Christina has asked, what do you actually design? Do you do the robots, the UI, the processes? Tell us a little bit about your actual day job and what that involves.
That's a perfect question, and I'm super excited to talk about this. So I work for the Human-Centered Design Group, which was the first official design group at JPL in its 86 years. It's been around for about 9 years, and I've been here for 7. And my personal tasks are I'm doing design on the Europa Clipper mission, the Deep Space Network, and the Europa Lander mission concept. And for each of those, I designed something slightly different. For Europa Clipper, I'm doing primarily service design. So I'm figuring out how information will flow from person to person and system to system. And I'm designing the workflows and the processes that people will use to operate the mission when we launch in 2024. And we're going to go out and orbit Jupiter and one of its moons. And this is a really complex mission. And so I've helped come up with this really cool ops concept for how we'll do our operations. And now I'm working with all of the different subsystems to figure out, okay, what kind of people do you need? And how will they interact with each other? And when will meetings happen? So it's truly, truly service design. And on that mission, I don't get to do any software design, which is just blowing my brain, but there's so much work to do in the service design that it's fine. On the Deep Space Network, I'm doing human automation teaming design. So I design software for people who are controlling these giant antennas. The antennas weigh 10 million pounds, and they're in 3 locations around the globe. There's some here in California. There are some in Madrid, Spain, and some in Canberra, Australia. And these antennas point out at a very specific point in space and receive signals or send commands to the spacecraft. Everything that's further away from the Earth than the moon uses the Deep Space Network to send pictures home, including James Webb. All those pictures you saw, they come through the DSN. And there are these operators who are controlling these giant antennas, and I designed their software to do that, as well as, and it's this really cool, like when you picture mission control, that's what these guys are doing. They've got 6 screens and they're kind of like super intense, moving stuff around and catching data. It's just amazing. I also, because we're trying to automate some of that so that they can do more, I'm designing the ways in which the automation and the humans can team up together and work as co-agents to manage the Deep Space Network. And then for the Europa Lander mission concept, I'm doing all of the above. The Europa Lander would be an extremely autonomous mission. It will land by itself, pick its sample sites by itself, take the samples, do the analysis, decide what's interesting, and send only the interesting stuff home. And so the human autonomy teaming problem there is huge, because we've never done a mission like that. We've never done a mission where the spacecraft itself was its own thing and did its own like work and made its own decisions. And so I'm designing the ground data systems, the software we will use to understand what's going on, but I'm also designing the processes we'll use. And we're doing these really cool, we just finished doing a series of simulations where we pretend to be in operations. Now, this mission wouldn't happen for at least 10 or 15 years, but we've already figured out what it'll be like to run the mission. And we're using that to build the autonomy. So just really cool variety of stuff that I get to work on.
That is incredible. I can already see a few people with like mind blown emojis in the chat there. That is absolutely insanely cool, to say the least. And wow, like £10 million antennas, 10 million ton antennas. That's just insane that this kind of stuff exists, right? And just so cool that you get to work on it. That's incredible. I just want to check before I go to the next question. Laura, are you back? Because I can see
am back. I
you are. I was
apologize.
going to say,
I feel like this
no,
really is
that's
like an
fine.
ultra moon mission right now, just trying to get back into a Zoom call. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much.
No, that's
Honestly,
fine.
my service design brain, though, while I was listening into that, I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like, it takes everything you do and you're like, oh yeah, complex financial systems, and then you're like, spacecraft, this is another level. Awesome to hear. Yeah, we do have some more questions. I wanted to just kind of keep going on some of them, and actually some of the questions that I had and we'd kind of discussed previously. I think Megan actually touched on one, and we'll come to some of the others as well, but Megan was actually asking about the design setup at JPL. She mentioned the lab, the studio. So it'd be really interesting, like, how big is the team as well? Like, what is that setup? What does it look like?
Yeah, so JPL, the human-centered design team is quite small. Right now, we just have 7 people. We do this thing where we get really big and then we split and we send a bunch of people off to start a new team. And one of those other teams currently has about 10 people. I'd say in the design community of practice at JPL, there are about 60 people, 30 of which I would say are UX designers, and 30 are either graphic designers or they're mechanical designers designing the actual robots, or they're developers who love design, or, you know, in some way design adjacent. But this is the community of practice that we've built. And my group was the first formal design group. There's the studio, which is another group at JPL, and they do a lot of, if you see some of our outreach artwork, they take care of the website. They do really outward facing stuff, as well as they do all of the art installations that are around the lab, which are themselves just really amazing and inspiring works. They're great artists and I love them. There's also the Human Systems Integration Group, which is one of the ones that split off from ours. And they are working on the tools that systems engineers, that's rocket scientists, that these guys are working on the tools they use to design spacecraft, to design missions, and to manage all of the bazillion documents that go into missions and manage all the knowledge. It's just, their work is amazing as well. And then there are designers kind of peppered throughout other groups, like our business tools group has hired a couple of designers. I helped them hire. And, a visualization group has hired a couple of designers that I helped them hire. So here and there, we're peppering design throughout the organization. As they see us be successful, they are wanting that for themselves, and we are 100% eager to help them get it.
Love that. Amy just asked a question. I was going to ask you around how, as those breakaway teams, do you lose contact with them or do you continue to work with them? And Amy's also asked, like, do you collaborate with designers in one of the other 9 agencies, for example? Do they even have designers?
Yeah, so the short answers to both are yes. And then I'll give the long-winded answer. When a team breaks away from ours, I still have a relationship with the people who are on that team. And so we still stay part of the bigger design community of practice, which I organize. And also, we will often still work on the same projects together. So we try to collaborate as much as possible. And it's my hope, I even try to collaborate with the people in the studio as often as possible. It's my hope that design will always be a big family at JPL. And that even though JPL is big, we'll never stop being working in tandem, sharing with each other, and helping each other grow. As for other NASA centers, a few other NASA centers have UX designers. Johnson, for example, has UX designers, but they are contractors, and they are, it's harder to get in touch with them. NASA Ames, the other California center, has has UX designers, and we've been in touch with them, and we work with them on a project called Cockpit that the Perseverance rover uses. And then there's human factors in NASA at pretty much every center. And human factors I would distinguish as being primarily research-based and not always resulting in a design, but usually resulting in recommendations. So as I've seen it at the NASA centers, human factors will do the research to figure out, how this space shuttle needs to be, how the stuff in the shuttle needs to be laid out, or what the right height for this device is on the space station. And then they will provide those recommendations and someone else will design it. And the human factors community of practice I'm a member of, and we're starting to see the growth of a human systems integration community of practice, which I would say is a bunch of people who I would call UX designers, but they also do service design at various NASA centers coming together to partner and support each other. So all of that is kind of an emerging, growing thing that's happening. And I can't say it's terribly well established, but it is happening and it feels amazing. As a matter of fact, Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama reached out to me a few years ago because they wanted to have a design system for like emergency stops and things like that for the space shuttle. And we shared our design system stuff with them, and hopefully that'll become, it takes years for these things to happen. But I'm really excited to see them take that design system and grow it and make something amazing out of it.
That's awesome. Love that. I think there are a couple of things we lead into. I think you mentioned contractors. I don't know whether you do like external agencies or not as well, but there was also a question, I think it was Jason that mentioned something about maturity there and how design is valued, and you kind of mentioned that people kind of want more of it when they see it, and then you end up kind of building. But across the board, and I mean, you've been there for 7 years, how has that even changed? I think 7 years, you say? How's it changed in those 7 years?
Yeah, it has matured a lot in the 7 years I've been here. When I first joined, in my first week, I had done some storyboards to explain a concept of operations for this new modernized way of designing spacecraft. And an engineer who'd been there for like 30 years took me aside and said, look, I really like you and I want you to be successful here. So I just want to tell you that your cartoons are not going to be well received. I'm going to need you to make PowerPoints with words, and we like quad charts. And so if you could please make a quad chart explaining the concept, people are going to respect you and believe you a lot more when you talk. And of course, bless his heart, he had the best of intentions. And he told me that, he really believed in what I'd done because he took a UI class 20 years ago. And I thanked him for his feedback and helped him understand that a storyboard actually communicates a concept in a way that words cannot. That I would absolutely make him his quad chart, but I was not going to stop making storyboards to explain concepts. And then it turned out that storyboards are like the #1 request I ever get from anyone. I've got this thing. Can you make me a storyboard to explain it? And that's where I started, was with pretty much everyone feeling like, oh, no. Designers don't need to be doing personas or storyboards or research. They just need to make it look pretty at the end. Now, designers are being brought in at the architecture level. I've been involved. So you have phases in a space mission. You have A through E and maybe F, which is closeout. But E is operations and A is, okay, we're going to do this thing. Let's figure out how. I was initially brought in at phase C. And then I was brought in at phase B, and then phase A, and I'm actually working on a pre-phase A mission. So designers are getting a seat at the table much earlier in the process, and we're allowed to have much more formative influence on these projects. And that to me says that the maturity, at least in the mission systems, is much improved. Now, there are definitely areas of JPL, and it's a huge thing, and it's very entrepreneurial, and everything is kind of siloed. There are areas of JPL where design is not as respected, and we're working on those areas, and we're working on helping them mature into the point where design is not a thing you have to advocate for. It's just a thing that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, yeah. I mean, on the oh, I've got so many questions. On the point of maturity, I think that I'll stick to community questions rather than just monopolizing the time by myself. But I mean, there's a question from Jennifer that sort of speaks to the fact that well, it says, it sounds like you're quite a multidisciplinary designer doing UX, service design and research. Do you think you need to be a multidisciplinary designer to work within the design team there? Or do you think that it's got to the point where specialization is an option for people?
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes and no. The reason being that JPL is ready for specialization, and we actually do have in the human systems integration team, she has 2 people who are just researchers. They're not designers. And she has 1 person who's a designer but not a researcher. So there is some specialization able to happen, but the problem is how JPL assigns its budgets. So we bill our time like an agency would, and every designer has to bill their time to a mission. And every mission has so much budget that it can allot to people. And that's decided 10 years in advance, right? So right now, the way that the budgets are written for all of the existing missions is that there's like room for half of 1 person to do design for the entire mission. And that's because we fought to get that half. And so when you have half of 1 person working on a flagship billion-dollar mission, you do not have an ability to specialize, and that person has to be a generalist. But for the new missions that are coming up, we've actually negotiated budget for like 3 FTE, as they call it. So this theoretically could have some specialization. You could have a designer and a researcher and perhaps an information architect or a service designer, right? You could have specialization in those. But for the current missions and all of the current work, it almost has to be a generalist, at least in the mission system. Now, again, in the human systems integration, because their projects are more stable and their budgets are a little more flexible, they are able to have more specialization.
Nice. I mean, it's really interesting to kind of understand how there's almost like a different dynamic, because you've got these kind of very future-proof projects, and then there's the sort of more here in terms of like the planning. And I mean, there's a question here around the design challenges of actually, I mean, we talk about vision in most companies, and you're kind of starting maybe 3 to 5 years ahead. You just mentioned 10 years ahead for some of these projects. Like, how do you kind of mitigate and future-proof an approach for that? I mean, so much can change within 10 years, even if that is a timeline that you're used to working with.
Yeah. So part of that is helped by the fact that I have been doing design for 26 years, and I've seen a lot of trends come and go. And so I have a pretty good instinct, not a perfect instinct, but I have a pretty good instinct for what is going to stay and what is going to go. And don't ask me, because I don't want to insult anybody who loves a particular trend. But what I try to do is when I'm designing for, I've been working on Europa Clipper for 5 years, and it launches in 2024, and it won't get to Jupiter until 2031. Yeah, 2031 is when we'll be in operations. So this is a very long-term project. And as I'm thinking about the design for this, what I'm trying to do is stick with universal truths, stick with standards. I'm sacrificing sometimes beauty and excitement in my design for staying power. And I'm using standards that are tried and true and based in psychology research and based in like really good empirical standards to do my designs. And in that way, I am attempting to future-proof. But the other thing that we're doing, and this is a recent innovation since I joined JPL, is that we're building the presentation layer separate from the back end. That was never done before. And in this way, if when Clipper gets to Jupiter in 2031, there's this entirely new method of gestural interface that allows you to control the spacecraft with interpretive dance. We'll be ready for that. We'll be able to build that in, and we'll be able to structure our operations around it because of the fact that we're trying to really divorce the pieces from each other and componentize our work.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're kind of saying that you need to kind of you're kind of treating each element as sort of fundamentally something that can be switched in and out depending on how it goes. Is that something that is just at a design level, or is that something that a mindset that sort of everyone across the team in different functions would adopt as well?
I can't say it's everyone across the team. I can say that it is a growing mindset that we are actively building. And I think it depends on the mission you're on, whether that mindset is prevalent or a minority. Each mission is like its own company, really. And you have a different culture, you have a different mindset, you have different types of experience coming to play. I would say on the Deep Space Network, that mindset is now becoming prevalent. It's taken me 7 years to really reinforce it. And it's taken the partnership of a really amazing developer to reinforce that. And it's taken some leadership changes. On Europa Clipper, I'd say that at least in the ground system tools, that's the tools that operators will use here on Earth, I'd say that mindset is prevalent. And it really helps because you don't have, if you're trying to fight uphill against, people who think that's the wrong way to do things and we should use legacy software that we've been using because it's tried and true, that can make things very difficult because they have a great point. Using tried and true software and using tried and true methods is absolutely a way to reduce risk. It'll work because it's worked in the past, but it's not always the best way to future-proof.
Yeah, awesome. I hope I'm going to say this name correctly. Kareem asked a question that's slightly different, but just I think that there are kind of couple of questions in this area. Advice, I mean, you said it 10 years you had, and eventually you found someone that knew someone to kind of get you in and said, hey, how do you apply? But I'd like, if it's I mean, this question is particularly for grads, but like genuinely, like what advice would you have for someone looking to kind of get into the space industry?
Yeah, so if you are still in school, I cannot recommend internships enough. Internships are absolutely your best path. And even if for some reason you don't get hired by NASA after an internship with NASA, it'll make your life much easier in getting other jobs, right? Because people love to see NASA on somebody's resume, or in Europe, the ESA, or in Japan, JAXA, et cetera, et cetera. I really recommend it. I also would say that if you've already graduated and you are in the workforce, build up a strong portfolio and apply. My persistence paid off, right? It took me 10 years, but I'm finally here. If you truly want it, apply. And don't take it personally if they don't hire you. there have been a lot of really great designers that I have interviewed that I have wanted to hire so badly, but they just weren't right for the particular tasks I had for them or for the mixture I needed in the team at that time. And there are people that I will literally reach out to when I get a new requisition open and say, you know, I've got a rec open. What are you doing? Do you want to come up interview for that? I'd really like to talk to you about this. And sometimes they say, oh, you know, I just started a new job. I'm really happy I can't now. And that's fine. I say, great, I'll reach out for you to you for the next one. I will also warn you that work in the public sector does, at least in the US, does not pay as well as work in the private sector. I am amply compensated. I'm very happy with my compensation. But people, especially newer people, don't necessarily get the huge .com paychecks at NASA JPL that they would get working for a .com company. So you may want to consider working in the private industry, working on really complex applications, working on stuff that has a lot of layers. Like you said, the financial sector is great for that. Supply chain, medical, logistics, all of those things have really complex systems of systems that will prepare you for a job as a designer in aerospace. I know I had no aerospace background when I came to JPL, and I had to do a lot of reading to catch up. And I'm still doing a lot of reading to catch up. But because I had supply chain logistics and I had worked with really complex content management systems, and I'd worked with medical, all of those things helped me be prepared for the type of work I do here.
I love that. I mean, I think, space is probably an extra example, but going between industries generally, I think that's part of the thing of what's exciting about designers is those transferable skills and the ability to adapt and take one kind of system and understand. There's obviously a lot of reading, and even if you went from one space industry to another, I'm sure like when you go from one financial industry or one financial company to another, they have their own acronyms, their own way of doing things, and there's always that onboarding curve that you're like, oh my god, this is good. It's like, I think we always used to say, it's like drinking from the fire hose. You get into that first call and it's like
Well, it's the same thing. I don't expect people to be actually productive for at least 6 months. Because you've just got this fire hose coming at you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have to ask, like, what is the kind of recruitment process? Like, what's the kind of interview process for someone coming? I mean, you just said reach out, like, let's have a chat. That makes it sound probably far easier than it actually is if it took you maybe 10 years to get in. So what kind of, if someone was putting themselves out there, and what kind of thing could they expect?
I have changed the hiring process a lot since I went through it. So now the best first step is to have a conversation with somebody at JPL. Let us get to know you even before we have a requisition. You're all welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. And there are other people in my group or at JPL who would also love to talk to you. So we all share people with each other. And that is a great first step. And then once there's a requisition, absolutely apply, but also reach out to somebody at JPL and let them know that you applied. If you can find the hiring manager, great. Otherwise, reach out to me and I'll help you find the hiring manager. That always helps. And then the interview process is pretty regimented now. We have set up a rigorous hiring process so that we can really be fair to people. We do resume screening, portfolio screening. You have to have a portfolio. We just can't judge your work otherwise. And then we do a phone screen, either a team phone screen or just one-on-one. If you make it through that, we have a full day interview process where we work a project together from soup to nuts. You will do the research, you will do design, you will do a prototype, you will do usability testing on that prototype, soup to nuts in one day. And it's always the same project. We don't use it for real life, like that would be horrible. It's just this test project. Everybody gets the same project. And it gives us a good sense of how you solve problems, and it gives you a sense of what it's like to work with us. And we really love that process because it's so much fun, even though it's also exhausting because you're doing a project from soup to nuts in a day. And then after that, we make a hiring decision. We literally are that quick about it. Sometimes that decision is no, but that, again, that doesn't mean that it's no forever. It just means that you weren't right for the projects we were hiring for at the moment.
I love that you say we don't use it as if someone's going to come in and do the day with you, and then like 10 years in the future, they're like, oh wait, that was my idea that went up on like the moon.
I've had that happen to me. I had
That's-
somebody use my interview design on their site. Like it was
Yeah.
active. So I would never
think
do that to someone else.
everyone's had a little experience that, yeah. I mean, I think I love that you offered for people to reach out. I feel like your DMs are going to be popping after this. Get ready for that one. I think that there's a question here that would be interesting because I know you, I mean, it was just when I dropped off, unfortunately, but I kind of heard the tail end of, no, you don't necessarily have to be in the States. And just wondering, there's a question here around like diversity in the design team. I think obviously diversity more than location, but kind of what is that like with the kind of 6 people that's there at the moment and wider?
Yeah, so in the design community, we have people hailing from every ethnicity, every creed, every gender, every sexuality. It's really a joy to work with these people. And JPL, I would say, is the most diverse place I've ever worked in. The support for diversity is just amazing. In my team specifically, when I'm recruiting, I specifically post in places where I believe I'm going to get diverse applicants. And then as I'm screening, I screen blind. So I can't even tell who I'm looking at when I'm looking at a resume. And that helps a ton to build our diversity, because if I had any internal biases, they're completely cut off, which is a great relief. We have on our team at the moment, we are majority female. No, I guess we're half and half. We have 3 women and 3 men, and that's pretty amazing. Wow. I didn't realize that. Before we were majority female. And we have we have queer people, we have straight people, we have people from several ethnicities, we have people from several different religious backgrounds. And the design community itself is so supportive. Like just who you are is accepted. And there's very much, I'd say JPL's attitude is very much come as you are.
Love that. I kind of feel like that's like just up the top. Now I'm going to ask a completely different question now, but I mean, in terms of that, and then also just generally in terms of process and how you kind of approach and the collaboration, how is kind of what you've built at or managed to build up at JPL over the last 7 years, just in terms of like being a designer, how does it compare with the other roles that you've been like working in?
It's much harder than any other role I've ever had. And it's hard not only in the terms of the wicked problems we're solving, the work itself is really hard and really rewarding. It's also harder in the politics and in the scope and in the slowness with which things move. Again, I've been working for a project for 5 years, right? And there's nothing yet. We don't launch for another 2 years, year and a half. So there is a definite slowness to the progress, but there's also a luxury of getting to do the research right. How many times have you had the opportunity to do 6 months of ethnographic research before designing something? I mean, wow. The other thing I would say that it's a huge difference is I will never get to statistical significance with my research. When I did research out in the world, I could have an idea on Monday. It would be live on the site Friday. And over the weekend, I would get to 1 million users in my A/B test so that I could have statistical significance and I could strongly say design B works better than design A, I might have 200 users for my Europa Clipper software over the lifetime of the mission. And so I will never get to statistical significance because it's just not possible. And so I have to design a little bit. I can design based on research, and I can design for the users I have, and I can try to design for the users of the future. But I can't ever say I'm 100% certain that a choice is the right choice. I have to go with a little bit of gut and with a 90% certainty.
I mean, you mentioned 200 users there for Europa Clipper. Who are your users?
So when you have a mission, you will have specialized operators who all work for JPL or for partner institutions like SWIRI in Colorado or LASP or, MIT, other universities, or perhaps even other space agencies. And those will be the users of my team's software. So there'll be JPLers, there'll be scientists coming from other institutions. And there's never, for our software, there's never a big user base. For the Deep Space Network, my total user base worldwide is 60 people. It's tiny. But the great thing is I can talk to every single one of my users. I can reach out and call Juan Gallardo in Spain and say, yo, Juan, I'm wondering what you think of these new designs. What do you think? Can we work together to make them better? So that's the advantage, where the disadvantage is my tiny, tiny numbers, so small.
Yeah, it's instead of you kind of go deep rather than go wide, I suppose, with that. Pros and cons, as you say, even to the point where you were talking about the time things take. And I know that speaking to loads of people, when you go into like big corporations or government, things move so slowly, and it takes certain designers to be like, yeah, I kind of like that environment and that works for me, versus actually I want to be in an agency and I need things moving and I need to get things done, because otherwise I just get annoyed by process and red tape. And it kind of, I guess, it swings in roundabouts as to whether that's something that you can see the benefit in, whether it's 6 months of ethnographic research or something else, or whether it's just not the kind of environment that's going to kind of keep you motivated enough.
Yeah, it is not for everybody. And I have lost people who just couldn't handle the slow pace. And they are great people. So it's a heartbreak that I lost them. But also these missions take a really long time, and there's not a lot I can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've given us such a good background of where it's come from, how you've managed to evolve it over the 7 years. Where do you see it going in the future, whether it's the next 7 years or even something else, even longer term, as designed within JPL?
Yeah, so my goal long term before I retire, which is in 21 years, is to have design on the executive council of JPL. I wanted designers, not me, sitting on the executive council, whispering in the lab director's ear. I want design groups in every major section. So a group like mine everywhere throughout JPL where services or software are designed. And I want design to be part of the critical infrastructure of every single mission. And that vision extends past JPL also to the other NASA centers. I want at least one design group in every NASA center there is, and I want them all to be my best friends so that we can all work together and share information and support each other.
I love that. Ultimate designer. They just want to make friends and collaborate with everyone. That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot slightly, as if I haven't already. But I think we've got so many questions, and I'm sure people will be flooding your inbox with more after this. But I guess just to wrap up on everything, just so I can respect your time and everyone else's, I would just love to know, what's your kind of been the proudest moment of you being all the work that you've done over the last 7 years?
There is a brilliant scientist who's actually retiring next month. He's been at JPL for over 40 years. I think it's 45 years. And he is an AI expert. This guy is like, he makes autonomous robots. That's his science. And when I joined the project he and I worked on, he told me that he didn't know that my research was going to do any good, but that he was going to be supportive of me and he was going to try to be open-minded. And about 6 months ago, he said that I had completely won him over and that he was now a 100% believer and no mission should happen without designers involved early and often. And that moment of this man that I respect so much and who had been so fair but so skeptical of our work, I am not ashamed to admit I cried like a baby. I was like, yeah, because it was really just the most rewarding moment to see that although it is a big change for people to make, people are making that change and they are coming around to see that we can help and that we're valid and we contribute.
That's amazing. And I mean, massive credit to you on that. And I think it just echoes the kind of sentiment of everyone here, really. That's just thank you so much for kind of the time and the generosity. And I've got no doubt that you will achieve everything. And hopefully we can check back in with you soon and understand how you're getting on. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone as well for joining us. Apologies again for our failure in a launch mission of trying to get this Zoom event off the ground and me dropping off. That wasn't planned, but I was quite happy with that's quite a good little pun there for myself. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone and enjoy the rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you again soon on another event.
Thanks for having me. It was really a joy to talk to you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.